What is identity? It's a question many who are multicultural have had to deal with their entire lives. Is it the qualities, beliefs, looks, or self-image that make up the person? As a generation of biracial and multi-ethnic children come of age, their experiences may be reshaping how Americans in general perceive race. CTV examined this issue over the past 6 months, delving into the backgrounds and thoughts of 7 different people of diverse backgrounds. In part 1 of my 5-part series called A Bridge Between Cultures, we introduce you to those 7 individuals and learn how they define themselves and how they navigate between cultures.
I'm about half Chinese and about half American.
My mother is Dominican. She grew up there and then she immigrated when she was around 8 years old. My father's family is Ukrainian.
So my mom, Caucasian woman, born and raised in Fredericksburg, Virginia. My father was born and raised, he's African American, in Richmond, Virginia.
I'm Filipino, 5/8 Filipino, 2/8 Russian, and 1/8 Spanish.
My wife certainly had no clue the first time that she saw me that I was half Vietnamese and half American.
My parents divorced when I was 3. And my dad raised us, my dad and stepmother, when they married when I was almost 7. So since I was raised really entirely by Black people in a Black neighborhood, I completely identify as Black.
My mom's Black, my dad's white.
Meet 7 people who have had very diverse experiences growing up. All are mixed culturally, but see themselves quite differently. Dr. Leanna Wenderoth is a child psychologist and says having a foot in different cultures has helped her ability to read people. She says it's a trait she developed when people would try to guess her ethnicity. Her father is white and Jewish, her mother African American. Did the comments come like people guessing your ethnicity, and were you all over the place with that?
A lot of times they would guess. They would also say, oh, but you don't look Black. Or, if I self-identified as Black just for ease, because back in the 70s it was like biracial really wasn't a thing.
Today, many take for granted the challenges biracial people have had fitting into one group or another. The new show Mixed Dish takes a humorous look at some of those issues.
My parents had sent us out into the world with absolutely no warning that being mixed was even a thing.
That was often a real-life scenario for many. While some chose one race over the other, others have wrestled with questions of self-identity. Have you ever been in a situation where you feel like you have to pick a single race over the other?
When I was younger, and even now, I experienced a little bit of a mixed identity crisis, not feeling like you're enough of either one. Or when I was around Latino kids, my Spanish wasn't perfect because it was a second language and I didn't speak it well enough, so as a byproduct of that, I wasn't Latino enough. And then, of course, I never felt Ukrainian enough, when with my other cousins, who are like full Ukrainian.
When people look at my name on paper, they might not expect me to look like this. So sometimes there's a little start as I enter the room, or they call out my name and they're not expected to see someone with this type of face answering.
When I was growing up, I think what was really challenging is that there wasn't very many biracial children, I guess, in my neighborhood. And it was really hard sometimes to identify like what your group was, like who you were. Was I going to be part of, the white kids or the Asian kids or the Black kids or the mixed kids? It was like, who were going to be my friends?
Our zip code in Mitchellville was also a zip code for Bowie.
Ramon Koryanoff says being multicultural allowed him to navigate cultures within his own zip code. He says back in the 70s, he would switch his hometown depending on who he was speaking with. It was Bowie if he was speaking to whites, and Mitchellville if interacting with African Americans. Koryanoff says he used it as a benchmark to gauge where someone was philosophically.
Changing the zip code where I lived or changing the name of the city was not just a survival mechanism, but more a way to relate to someone that might otherwise relate to you a little differently.
According to the Pew Research Center, many factors shape how people label themselves. It could be how they look or think they're perceived, the languages they speak, or who raised them. All 7 people we interviewed say home was a sanctuary of sorts where they felt love for who they were and didn't always have to navigate between cultures.
My parents raised us to not feel as though we were different. I don't ever remember having a conversation with them where we sat down and they were like, okay, you all are biracial, your mother is, we never had that type of discussion. So we were raised to not look at race and to not pay attention to race, that we are all equal, we all love one another.
And my brother.
Her tiny picture.
Oh, yeah.
You said you consider yourself Black. Have you ever felt like census or anything else where you've had to choose or pick, or has it always been that way for you?
To me, it's not a choice. It's what I am. So I just can't imagine it any other way. My entire family that I grew up with is African American. So it would be bizarre to me to be anything else. I mean, they've never treated me any differently. Yeah, he's 3 years older, but I still call him my baby brother. My dad.
Belonging to more than one group can often leave children of mixed heritage feeling that they're outsiders, a part of the whole, but always apart from it. Growing up multicultural wasn't always easy for the 7 people we interviewed for this series. They say they often felt bullied, isolated, and discriminated against. In part 2 of my series, A Bridge Between Cultures, we hear firsthand what life was like for Jolene Ivey, Alejandra Melnick, Ramon Koryanoff, Joe Howard, Jeff Liao, Leanna Wenderoth, and Janine Samuels.
We didn't really talk much about race growing up, and I think that there was more of a just keep it undisturbed.
While home may have been a sanctuary of sorts for children of multicultural backgrounds, going to school for the first time was often quite a challenge. Psychology Today reports that one of the most vexing part of the multiracial experience is being asked, what are you or where are you from?
I would joke about that a little bit when I was a kid, because I would get some of those questions in, like, I'm from Maryland, and people would say, no, where are you really from? So there was always sort of this question of, you're not really from here.
If somebody thinks I'm white, they don't say anything about it, right? If somebody thinks maybe I'm something else, then they'll ask, and I usually just tell them I'm Black.
When someone would ask me, well, what are you? I would say I was tan, and my older sister would say that she was beige. Like, there was no, Black, white, biracial. We didn't really understand that.
If I don't feel like delving into it, I will just tell the person I'm mixed. I won't exactly go into detail about what my ethnic background is, because I feel like that's something that's personal. I have to get to know you first, and then we can both share each other's stories. So yeah, sometimes I definitely don't have the tolerance for it.
Sometimes the comments are less than kind, a topic recently featured in the new TV comedy show Mixed-ish.
What are you weirdos mixed with?
What's mixed?
Being called Oreo cookie or zebra, and kids making fun of us because we had a Black father and a white mother.
People would, again, see my name on paper and sort of expect me to be 100% full Chinese, maybe born in China type things, and would make occasional off-color remarks, comments about Chinese food smelling bad, which I don't know where they're coming from that.
I was teased as a child only by Black children, because that's all I had access to, right? I didn't really have any relationship with anybody else. And I did get picked on by some of the kids in the neighborhood. I learned to run pretty fast.
With my Black friends, there was a little more of, you don't quite fit with us. People would say I don't talk the same way, or I don't look the same.
I had my feelings hurt when people might call you chink or gook or something like that.
It did leave an impression on you.
Not a persecuted impression, right? I mean, it made me angry.
In his youth, Ramon Koryanoff says he found kids suddenly less confrontational after the release of a June Reed commercial advertising martial arts.
Nobody buys me. Nobody buys me either.
A lot of Asian kids growing up were kind of lumped into that category. So any young people, any children that experienced bullying or had some sort of racial epithets thrown at them, hurled at them as a child, all of a sudden there was a new dynamic in town. There was a sense of, well, we're proud of our heritage and we can defend ourselves.
Several people we interviewed said they found the isolation their parents experienced more hurtful than the negative comments thrown their way.
my brothers, they would talk about, you know, my mom used to go to their soccer games, right, and watch, and then they would notice, like, when they look into the sidelines, like, here was all the American parents, and then over to the side was my mom, you know, the one Vietnamese mother that was there watching the game.
In this picture, that my mom is walking down the aisle by herself.
So it's still emotional because her father didn't go.
Janine Samuel's parents married in 1971, shortly after the Supreme Court declared that interracial marriages were no longer illegal. Prince George's councilwoman, Jolene Ivey, never met her maternal grandmother and only once met her mother's father. Ivey's parents were married in the 1950s in the District of Columbia. At the time, interracial marriages were illegal in many states, including Maryland and Virginia. She recalls the story when her mother told her parents that she was marrying a black man.
She took out his picture, and there's his 8x10 glossy of this black man, and they lost their minds. So her dad grabbed her and ran her to the airport and told her that her mother and her sisters were going to have her committed to an insane asylum.
It wasn't until her mother's death last summer that Jolene Ivey was finally able to visit the Tennessee farm where her mother grew up.
And there was this tree in the front yard that looked absolutely perfect for climbing and reading in. And that's where a lot of her ashes were spread from. One of our sons climbed up to the top of the tree and kind of spread them out from there. So I feel like she's home.
Could the childhood bullying many multicultural children experience somehow benefit them later in life? Does it make them more adaptable to different situations and groups of people, even as they struggle to find their place in society? Are there distinct advantages to growing up biracial? In part 3 of my series, A Bridge Between Cultures, 7 different people of mixed heritage tackle these issues and more. Though many biracial children say they face bullying and varying degrees of discrimination growing up, they say there were also many advantages to being multicultural.
When I've seen mixed race children, I do think that they are, you know, a little bit special.
One study looked at how those of mixed heritage are often perceived as more attractive than their counterparts in homogeneous populations.
There's a comedian, I can't remember who it is, but I think she's Asian, and I think that her child is half Asian, and she's like, I get so mad when people say that I think mixed race babies are beautiful. And she's like, what do you think about me?
Joe Howard says there weren't many biracial people in his neighborhood growing up. Today, he says it's no longer unusual and that he can spot someone of mixed heritage right away.
I'd like to believe there's some truth that, like, when your genes are mixed, like maybe your immune system is stronger, maybe all these things. Who knows, maybe because your genes are mixed, your pheromones come off differently and people read them differently and they find that attractive. I don't know, or maybe they just, when they look at you, they see the features that they find attractive from both races.
Alejandra Melnick says she and her identical twin sisters struggled with their hair and appearance growing up, never quite feeling as attractive as their peers. But she says they're now comfortable with their differences.
As a kid, you don't really realize you're different until other people point it out to you. So I have a memory growing up where I have, it's back now, but I have very crazy curly hair, and growing up, all the girls in my class had a really nice, like, silky, straight hair. And I just remember, like, playing and braiding my friend's hair and just thinking, why don't I have hair like this?
I would have people comment on my looks. I always thought of myself as looking more interesting than more attractive, and maybe that had something to do with it, or, you know, kind of unusual.
For others, their unique backgrounds have helped them adapt to different situations.
My children, they are not the least bit troubled by my appearance. They like to tease me, you know, about me being white. They think it's hilarious. And if we run into a situation where they know it would go better if it's a white person making the request or whatever, they will tell me, hey, Ma, go use your white privilege. Go do that. And they're right. It works.
I do have an ability to kind of blend in and be involved. And it's just, I think, really, you have to take the best of both worlds and really apply it to your own world. And reaching out to folks and having an open mind, I think that's the key to everything.
I never surrounded myself with people that made me choose or made me feel lesser than I was. And I was very fortunate to have friends in very different ethnicities that were loving and accepting of me. And if they weren't, I was too naive to even realize that they weren't.
You know, my brother and I grew up in a household that regularly ate Chinese food because my dad loved to cook it. So we got accustomed to using chopsticks when we were very, very young. We were out at a Chinese restaurant with my family and some of my parents' friends. When we were served the food, all the food comes out, chopsticks come out. Some of my parents' friends look at us and wonder if, frantically start looking around the restaurant if there's a fork and knife somewhere that we can use. And my brother and I simply pick up chopsticks and dig in like it's an everyday thing.
Jeff Liao says as he's grown older, he's rediscovered Chinese history.
A fun pastime of mine in museums is to walk around looking for things with my name on it and take pictures of them, whether that be from the Liao dynasty in the 300s BCE or an artist with that same last name.
One study actually has multiracial people reporting higher self-esteem, well-being, and social engagements.
My personal experience is I really do enjoy, social engagement. A lot of my multiracial friends are very similar to that, are very, socially engaged and very fluid in those social abilities.
When you don't quite fit in a box, how do you respond to the stares and comments as people try to guess your ethnicity? It's an issue all 7 people we interviewed continue to face on a regular basis. What can the general population learn from their experiences as the number of multiracial Americans continues to grow? In part 4 of my series, A Bridge Between Cultures, we learn how the self-identity of our 7 interviewees has evolved over time and how they use their challenges as teachable moments.
Mom.
Yes, honey?
Dad told me that Cheerios is good for your heart. Is that true?
Says here that Cheerios has whole grain oats that can help remove some cholesterol, and that's heart healthy.
When this Cheerios cereal ad came out in 2013 featuring an interracial couple and their daughter, General Mills was hit with a rash of racist taunts. While many people of mixed heritage found the stares and questions challenging in their younger years,
I think as a younger person, I probably felt more irritated.
As they've aged, they often use the comments as teachable moments.
Oftentimes people just start blurting out Spanish to me. Sometimes people, think I'm from different parts of the world where I have no remote connection to. But I find it an interesting icebreaker, a way to start a conversation, and it helps me relate to them on a broader level.
People will often come to you and they're curious. They want to hear your perspective, and it's good because you can educate people that way.
If somebody really pressed, I would say, well, my mom's black, my dad's white, and they might ask me more questions about it. And I would usually try to treat it as more curiosity as opposed to something negative.
I hear a lot from biracial people that one of the first questions they get asked is, what are you? Is that something you've ever experienced?
Yes, absolutely. And for the most part, I'm very happy to talk about it when people ask me, and I'm just as happy to ask other people about it as well.
Jeff Liao's father was born in Hong Kong, grew up in Brazil, and went to college in San Francisco where he met his wife.
We probably ate more Chinese food and had a little more Chinese culture and experience. But my dad still had family in Brazil, so we experienced Brazilian food and culture just as much.
In the past, Americans of mixed heritage often had to choose one race over the other. They weren't identified as multicultural. It wasn't until the year 2000 that the U.S. Census began allowing Americans to self-identify as more than one race. Even so, according to a 2015 Pew survey, 61% of Americans with a mixed racial background don't identify as multiracial at all.
I do sometimes find out and am surprised when black people who I thought knew I was black the whole time, when I find out that they've assumed I was white, or they'll mention something to Glenn, my husband, and say how comfortable I seem around black people.
Half report identifying as the race they most closely resemble. But could that be changing? Could their self-identity evolve over the years?
There's definitely, I feel like, a shift. When I was younger, I was teased for being half Black. Now, like my nieces and nephew, it's almost, there's pride behind being partially African American. For example, one of my nieces, her friends did not believe that she was partially Black. And now there's only a quarter Black because my sister married a white guy, but she had to prove to her friends that she was quarter Black, and she wanted to make sure that they understood. So she was like showing them pictures of my father, her pop, to prove that she was partially African American, because now it's kind of cool to be associated with and to be Black.
CTV reporter Janine Samuels is also a former professional cheerleader. She says sports helped with her self-identity.
People knew about the division of races, but I was in the athletic environment and we were all a team. So we didn't pay as much attention to ethnicity because we were all in it to win it together.
Today, the number of multiracial Americans is growing at 3 times the rate as the general population, according to the Pew Research Center. That means their numbers could soar to 20% of the population in the next 30 years. And many of them are passing on to the next generation an even more diverse gene pool.
And that's Papa and me.
My son, who obviously my wife's Filipina, but of Chinese origin. So he's super like multicultural. He's Chinese, Russian, Filipino, and Spanish.
Laid your hands on me.
Joe Howard runs an Arthur Murray franchise where he deals with people of many races and nationalities. But he says it's taken some time to realize that he can fully embrace both his Vietnamese and American roots.
Everything from just food to taking off your shoes when you walk into the house to, I'm sure there's uncountable things I learned from my mother just through observation and listening and interacting that comes from the Vietnamese culture. I'm just not aware of it.
Take your routine and make it fit this music, I think.
The toughest part was being young and not knowing whom to identify with. And I think that young people are always looking for identity. Are you a jock, or are you a scholar, or are you with the Asian group or the white group? And it was really tough in my generation growing up to figure out where I wanted to be.
Her father was an Italian grocery man.
Alejandra Melnick says she no longer thinks of her Dominican and Ukrainian heritage in percentages.
So it's a little just like coming into your own and realizing that you're not one or the other. You are just both. They can exist simultaneously at the same time.
Navigating between different groups and situations seems to be second nature for people of mixed heritage. On their quest for self-identity, many have had to be flexible in order to survive. So could those adaptation skills make them better problem solvers in the future? Could they be a bridge between cultures? We take a look at that issue in the final segment of my 5-part series.
Numerous studies have shown that rigid thinking is often associated with less flexibility, less divergent thought, and less creativity. Could it be the opposite for multiracial people? After all, they've had to be versatile to navigate between identities as circumstances change. If so, could that mean they become important moderators in the future, helping to solve problems or disputes?
I do feel as though I've had the best of both worlds, and I can look at things differently because I am mixed race, and I can identify with struggles of, I feel like, anyone that feels like they're different. And that could be different because of their ethnicity, that could be different because of how they look, their skills, their abilities, anything like that.
Sometimes my parents were different or had different approaches to solve the same problem. My mom was usually a lot more outgoing, gregarious, and loved meeting people, loved talking to people, whereas my dad would much prefer to sit down with a stack of papers and try and work it out himself. So I don't know if that's a cultural effect or just who they are as people, but yeah, being able to leverage their experiences and what they taught me when I was a kid growing up, that certainly has helped.
I think dealing with stressful situations or with individuals that might have a certain sort of worldview or bent, you might be able to identify with certain aspects of their culture because, again, referring back to the third culture kid, growing up, you saw both the Filipino side of you and the sort of American side of you, and it was an opportunity for me to deal with those problems or problem solve by bringing your experiences to bear.
Over the last 50 years, there haven't been many examples of multi-ethnic role models in the movies or on TV, which could be one of the reasons many biracial people say they often struggle to fit in. But that trend is slowly changing.
Today's mixed kids can look up to rappers, ballerinas, athletes, a president, and a princess.
Child psychologist Leanna Wenderoth says those of mixed heritage not only learn to read a room for nonverbal cues, but they can blend in like a chameleon.
When I was in college, it was usually whatever somebody was familiar with. So I had a friend in college who was Ethiopian. When he first met me, he thought I was Ethiopian. I've had people who were Greek who thought I was Greek. They'd say, "Oh, you look like my aunt," or Native American. So I would get, whatever someone was more familiar with in terms of race and identity, that's what they would guess that I was.
Did you gravitate toward Asians as you got older?
Not necessarily, sometimes it kind of, in a strange way, kind of depended on who I was dating.
Of course, my race, it plays a big part, but it's not the sole thing that makes up who I am, and that's important to me. It's one of those, it's like the difference between personal and social identity. Like, your race is a social identity that's sort of been placed upon you, and yes, it's very important, but sometimes I want to let my personal identity shine, like my beliefs and values and everything else that makes up who I am.
Ramon Koryanov's Russian grandfather fled the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 and met his future wife in the Philippines after getting shipwrecked. Koryanov says that history has helped shape his views of the world.
You don't want to do Chinese?
Yeah, I don't want to do English.
Only English?
Yeah.
So if people of mixed heritage tend to think out of the box as a result of their upbringing, could they be a bridge between cultures in the future?
And even though it doesn't seem that way in the times in which we live right now, I think people will see that the current sort of backlash towards immigration and multiculturalism, that will be on the wrong side of history. So moving forward, I think people will realize that the cultural and multi-ethnic viewpoint is going to be one that's embraced later on.
I'd like to believe that it's getting easier now, that it's you're not being grouped together so much by your tribe or your race or whatever you want to call it.
I don't think that mixed race people should have to be the ambassadors to cure racism. That's not going to happen. But to the extent that people of all different kinds of experiences can share those experiences, and if other people are open to hearing them, then I think that's good.
Even though maybe I wasn't necessarily prepared for the name calling and maybe didn't understand it at the beginning, I was raised to not notice race and to only pay attention to what's on the inside of a person and how that person treats me. And that's what's most important.
Jeff Liao says he thinks as people of mixed races become more commonplace, they'll become less of a curiosity in the future.
I would guess that a lot of kids growing up now who are biracial are just going to see it as a part of everyday life and not even pause to blink and think about it.
Now, obviously, I love this series, but not just because I was featured, but because it was very interesting to hear the similarities yet the differences that the seven of us have. How did you come up with this idea?
Well, it's interesting because my children also have a bicultural background. My sons are Latino and I'm of Italian heritage as well. And I read a Psychology Today article which talked about it and some of the similarities that they found. But I'm going to tell you it was a learning experience for me when I was there, because you find out that people that were so different varying backgrounds, and yet they had such similarities. Yeah. And ironically, one friend of mine, a close friend of mine, one of the things that he used to tell me was he was born in the Ivory Coast. His mother was from the Ivory Coast. His father was white American here. When he goes home to Ivory Coast, he's considered white, and when he's here, he's black.
Yeah. Wow. Goodness. So Throughout the series, you use different terms. So biracial, multicultural, mixed heritage. Why did you go back and forth between the different terms?
Well, we had such a varying degree of multi-ethnic backgrounds and of the people that were featured in this series that I interchanged a lot of them, but some people refer to themselves only as one. As you heard Jolene Ivy said, she's 100% black, even though she may be mixed, that is what she considers herself. And other people say biracial, other people say multi-ethnic. So I wanted to interchange it so you could understand the different terminology.
Right, and that was one story that really surprised me, just because I've always considered myself biracial, but I can understand why she only considers herself African American, because that's who she was raised by.
Right.
But in my home, we literally were split. So my mom had us half of the time, my dad had us the other half of the time, so we were raised by both.
So asking you a question now, when I first approached you about this, what was your initial take on it?
My initial take was, this isn't a story, only because it's just my life and it just seems normal to me. So being mixed race, it just is who I am. So I just wasn't thinking about the intricacies of it and the other stories that other people have.
And your father was watching this along with you? Tell us about the reaction.
Yes, so actually last night he was very surprised that I was called zebra and was teased at school. I guess we never shared that with him. So, but he's loved it. He's teared up and cried, and it's just been a wonderful experience. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to have done it.